Hey guys, Kevy Kev here. So our channel's growing, and I know it's new, but thanks to you guys, it's getting bigger every day. And I thought I'd do a video to tell you guys what makes me tick. Origin story, if you will. I know a lot of the leftists out there think I'm probably some Wonderbread guy from the suburbs who's privileged and white. Well, I am white, but other than that, I'm anything but that. And I've been to jail, been to war, traveled the world with hippies. I'll tell you guys all about it and what led me to my beliefs now. I've had a hard life for sure. I didn't always. I grew up in a good family and suburban life. I grew up between the city and the rural areas, and spent time in both when I was a kid. And I loved fishing, hunting. I went to private school at first, but because of a disagreement between me and a religious institution and some other things, I got kicked out of private school and went to public school. And public school in Baton Rouge is dog eat dog, and I was not privileged to go to those places, and it was definitely eye-opening. And you know, we had fights and everything else, and I was caught up in all that, and it really had a detriment to me as far as my growth as a person. I think our public school system's a total shame. But anyway, September 11th comes around, and I joined the Army on a whim. I knew that we were going to go to war, and I guess I'd read Tolstoy's War and Peace, and I figured, you know, the character in that book, he was privileged, and he was a prince, and he joined the Army just to see what makes men fight each other and kill each other, and he wanted the adventure. So I guess that's why I joined. I was sort of inspired by that, and I did. I got it. You know, I joined the Army. I went to nursing school while I was in the Army. I volunteered for Iraq. I went to Iraq. I actually paid my way to get a slot into Iraq. I had to bribe somebody to get a slot. But I got into Iraq. I went over there with the 31st Cash. And I loved the guys I was with. It was great. It was like a family. It was one of the best experiences of my life, next to my children being born. I loved it over there. The action all the time. You get addicted to it. And I saw people die. I mean, we pretty much handled everybody who was shot. Every time there was a mass casualty event or a car bomb, IED, things like that, we would go out and triage the people and all that. So, you know, it was pretty traumatic for a young guy. I saw a lot of death, a lot of mutilation, a lot of horrible stuff. So after I finished my tour in Iraq, I came out with PTSD, with a few medals and PTSD basically, and also an injury to my back that got worse progressively. And I got retired out the Army. I would have loved to stay in. I actually wanted to stay in Iraq, and I guess if I'd stayed in Iraq, I probably would have stayed in the Army, but I was miserable coming back. You know, I just loved the action. So I got out the Army, retired, and I was only 22, 23 years old, and I had a retirement check. It wasn't much at the time. It's actually gone up since then because I got a higher percentage later on from the VA, but it was enough for me to live modestly on. And I decided to go to New Orleans for Katrina and work as a nurse because I missed that action. So I went to Katrina, and there it was horrible. I mean, there wasn't anybody there when we got there. I went with one other person, and we actually saved a lot of lives, but we also had to put people down like dogs because there just wasn't any way to evacuate people, and they were dying slowly. And so there was this whole group of people in the basement of the airport in New Orleans that we had to, you know, just leave down there because they were dying. So we went down there and just gave them shots full of morphine. So that was pretty traumatic. So I had PTSD, and I had the back injury. And then the VA, which the VA is horrible, and I'm always an advocate for veterans. The VA gave me a handful of Oxycontin and told me to come back. They couldn't do surgery right away. So I got addicted to Oxycontin. And I had friends who got addicted, and a lot of my friends passed away because of suicide or addiction after the war. One of them being Joseph Dwyer, who was a famous soldier. And you can look him up. He was actually my roommate over there in El Paso. And he was a great guy, a famous soldier, and he killed himself with pills, and I miss him every day. But yeah, it was a crazy time. Katrina had happened. Louisiana was in flux. So I decided to go back to my parents' house and move in with them, and I got a job, and then I went and bought a house. And as soon as I bought that house, I met a girl at a party, and I ended up marrying her a few months later. And it was a girl I went to school with, I had known before. And the drug addiction started getting worse. And Oxycontin, these opiates just destroy people. And so she left me, and yeah, I lost my house too. So I finally had the surgery, and the surgery really made things worse, and I became paralyzed, and I lost everything during that time, the home, everything. And I ended up back at my parents' house, a big loser, doing nothing and moping all day. And so I realized I had to push through, or I'd end up like my friends who had died after the war. And during that time, you know, I was doing some stupid stuff. I was drinking heavily. I was miserable, sad, depressed, you know, going out with a different woman every night, drinking all the time, doing these drugs worse and worse. And it got bad. And I saw people, I was hanging out with losers. I was hanging out with people who were selling their own food stamps while their kids went hungry so they could buy more Oxycontin. You know, just horrible stuff. And I was paranoid. I was carrying a gun around, you know, just doing stuff that was stupid. I got arrested a couple times. And I decided to leave the United States. I was sick of it. I wanted to get out. I didn't want to face the court system here. So I got my passport, got a lawyer to handle the stuff in the U.S., and I used my retirement money to go out and live overseas. So I went down to Central America. I started in Mexico during 2012. That was the Mayan New Year, and there were a bunch of parties going on for the Mayan New Year. So I went down to Mexico, and I figured I could get drugs there over the counter. You know, it was a paradise for somebody living like that. And I met some hippies. I ended up living with these hippies in a commune. There in that commune, I actually wrote an article about it for Proud Boy magazine, and you can go read it. In that commune, I witnessed stuff that just changed my whole perspective about a lot of things. But, you know, I was doing hallucinogens, all kinds of crazy stuff, eating mushrooms, and hanging out with these hippies. And I noticed they would just steal stuff from people. They would always complain about money and the greed of capitalism, but they would steal from hardworking people. They would shit all over people's towns. They would literally shit all over their towns. They go in these towns by the hundreds, and this group's called the Rainbow Family. And they actually go travel the world in these communes, and they do these gatherings where people meet up in every place they go, and they pitch tents and hang out there and sing music and kumbaya and all that craziness, and, you know, free love, all whatever the hippies are into, they do it. But yeah, these people were a menace to every town they went to. And I started noticing that. I noticed how they complain about capitalism, but they would just replace our financial capital with human capital, with social capital. They'd use sex as money. They would use drugs as capital. And even in that small setting, these elite groups, you know, these sort of elite groups inside that setting, these college professors who came to hang out for the weekend, they would talk about how they need to turn all of the world into this, you know, communal living and communist lifestyle. And it was horrible. I mean, these people were total hypocrites. I called them the hypocrites. So I finally got sick of it and had a falling out with the group, left. Traveled around with some more hippies for a while, and I ended up in El Salvador. Down in El Salvador, I saw another form of communism that destroyed people's lives and was hypocritical. And I spent a lot of time in that country, and I actually met my wife there, but I didn't know she'd be my wife that trip. I actually continued to travel on down to Costa Rica and all over the place. And I met this girl there in El Salvador. I came back to the U.S. and she had messaged me on Facebook. So during that time, between those two incidences, I actually went on a fishing trip with my dad, and I was assaulted by 5 guys at a bar for fooling around with some girl they were interested in or whatever. I don't know exactly what happened, but they almost killed me. And I realized I was starting to hit rock bottom. And so I talked to this girl online, and she was a doctor, and she was really sweet. But I wasn't really interested in her. I didn't know anything about her, and, you know, you never know what life's going to throw at you. But I ended up feeling really down after that assault, and I decided I was fighting the courts because the police actually tried to charge me with something. So I was fighting it in the courts, even though I did nothing wrong, and I was the victim there. And I don't ever call myself a victim if I'm not. This case, you know, I've done lots of stuff to provoke people before and been in fights, but this case was a truly different circumstance. So anyway, I went on and started talking to her some more online, and she was like, why don't you come down to El Salvador? I'll travel with you if you want to travel. It sounded good, so I was like, okay, let's do it. So I went down there, and I traveled with her, and I just treated her like a friend. You know, it wasn't anything romantic at first, but she was so sweet. She actually showed up to the airport with her family, and I was so surprised by that. And she was so sweet to me the whole time, and I was so bad off on drugs. I had no idea why she was standing by me this whole time. And we went down to Costa Rica, and we were partying, and I was just blackout drunk every night on drugs. Anyway, when I got back to El Salvador, when it was time for me to go back to the U.S., because I'd flown in there to meet her before we went traveling around backpacking, she asked me if I wanted to get off drugs or if I wanted to die. And I said, well, yeah, I want to get off drugs. And I realized how sweet she had been and how good to me she was. And she wanted to help me, and she said I could stay there with her and she'd help me get off drugs. And I didn't think it was possible. But then I called my mom, and she asked me if I wanted to live like that, and I said no. And so I made the decision to stay with her. And what do you know, I ended up getting clean. It was the worst thing in the world, going through withdrawals in a country like El Salvador, where it's so hot and there's no access to anything. And I sobered up, and I ended up asking this girl to marry me, and I owe her my life. She's a doctor. She was a beautiful woman, inside and out. And, you know, that changed my life. And so I'd always been political, but I had seen during that time what communism was like. And I decided that I would get involved politically, but I wasn't doing much at the time. We came back to the U.S., and I found a job, but, you know, I was still having back problems, so I couldn't work. I ended up not finishing it. And yeah, we moved to North Carolina to be near her sister, and next thing I know, I'm getting involved with politics here. Well, we find out we're pregnant, and we actually lost that baby. We found out she was pregnant again, and my first daughter was born prematurely. And so I had all that going on, and I got out of politics. Then we had another baby who had all kinds of health problems at first. And this was all hard on me. But having those girls made me realize I had to fight for their future. And I got into politics again. I founded some political groups here in North Carolina. And got some projects going with people I met. And that leads us to where we are today, where I am today. I mean, it's a lot more to that story than just that. You know, I've done a lot of other crazy stuff, but I guess it's just, you know, one of these things where life brought me here, and I thought maybe I should share where I get my insights from. I haven't had the easiest life, is what I'm saying. And I've seen the damage done by collectivism, by communism, by leftism. And I've seen the beauty of freedom and having, you know, family, normal, whole lifestyles that are wholesome. And I've seen what, you know, people like my parents who own land, what they've gone through with the government. And I've seen the ins and outs of both sides, and I really think that we're fighting the right fight here, and I just wanted to tell you guys a little bit about me. I should have wrote something down, but I just did this off the cuff, so please forgive me for that. Thanks. Out.